The distress beacon cut through the background noise of deep space like a scream in a library, dragging Captain Marcus Reed from his off-duty reading with the kind of urgency that made his security training kick in before his coffee had even finished cooling. He'd been enjoying a rare quiet moment aboard the research vessel, Starbound Horizon, catching up on technical manuals that were only slightly less exciting than watching paint dry in zero gravity, when the ship's communication array lit up with proximity alerts and automated distress protocols. Unknown vessel broadcasting emergency beacon at coordinate 77 Alpha, announced Lieutenant Torres over the comm system, her voice carrying the crisp professionalism that meant something genuinely unusual was happening. Signals coming from a ship configuration that doesn't match anything in our databases. Captains requesting security assessment before we investigate. Marcus set down his manual on Advanced Plasma Conduit Maintenance, a comprehensive guide to not getting electrocuted, and headed for the bridge, wondering what kind of alien vessel would be drifting in this particular corner of nowhere. The Starbound Horizon was 3 weeks into a routine scientific survey mission, cataloging stellar phenomena in sectors so remote that most cartographers forgot they existed, which made finding distressed spacecraft about as likely as discovering a coffee shop that served decent espresso. "What's the situation?" he asked Captain Zhao, whose expression suggested she was balancing scientific curiosity with the kind of caution that kept research vessels from becoming expensive debris fields. "Unidentified ship, organic architecture, no response to our hails," she replied, gesturing toward the main viewscreen where a vessel unlike anything Marcus had ever seen slowly rotated against the star field. "It's beautiful, but it's also completely outside our experience with known spacefaring species. The distress signal is definitely automated, but we can't tell if there are survivors aboard." The ship was indeed beautiful, its hull flowing in curves that seemed more grown than built, with bioluminescent panels that pulsed in patterns suggesting a heartbeat rather than mechanical function. It looked like the kind of vessel that might have been designed by artists who happened to be master engineers, prioritizing aesthetic elegance without sacrificing functionality. "I'll take a boarding party and conduct preliminary reconnaissance," Marcus offered, already running through equipment checklists in his head. "Standard first contact protocols, document everything, avoid disturbing whatever we find until we understand what we're dealing with." "Agreed, but I want you to take Chen with you," Captain Zhao said, indicating the ship's xenobiologist, who had been studying the alien vessel's energy readings with the fascination of someone discovering new laws of physics. "If there are survivors, we'll need someone who understands non-human biology." 20 minutes later, Marcus found himself sealed into his environmental suit and floating in the docking bay, listening to Dr. Chen's increasingly frustrated commentary about malfunctioning equipment. Her specialized scanning gear had chosen this moment to develop what appeared to be an existential crisis, displaying error messages in 3 different languages while making sounds that suggested expensive electronics in serious distress. "The quantum resonance calibrator is completely fried," she announced, her voice carrying the particular tone scientists used when the universe failed to cooperate with their research plans. "I can't properly analyze alien biological systems without it, and the backup scanner is giving me readings that suggest the ship is somehow alive, which is either accurate or evidence that our equipment has developed a sense of humor." "How long to repair it?" Marcus asked, checking his suit's life support systems while calculating how much time they could spend aboard the alien vessel. "4 hours minimum, assuming I can convince the quantum matrices to remember what they're supposed to do," Dr. Chen replied, already dismantling components with the focused determination of someone who had spent years coaxing temperamental scientific instruments back to functionality. "You should proceed with the initial survey. I'll join you as soon as I can convince this equipment to stop behaving like abstract art." Marcus hesitated, standard protocols dictating that boarding unknown vessels required at least 2 team members for safety and documentation purposes. But the distress signal continued its automated plea for assistance, and delay might mean the difference between rescue and recovery of remains. "All right, I'll conduct preliminary reconnaissance alone," he decided, activating his suit's recording systems and checking his emergency beacon. "Full documentation, no unnecessary risks, out in 2 hours maximum." The docking procedure required creativity since the alien ship's airlock systems operated on principles his equipment couldn't quite interpret. Marcus managed to establish a viable seal using universal emergency protocols and a certain amount of improvisation that would probably violate several safety regulations if anyone bothered to review his methods. The interior of the vessel confirmed his initial impression that it had been grown rather than built. Corridors flowed in organic curves, walls displayed bioluminescent patterns that responded to his presence, and the entire structure seemed to pulse with subtle rhythms that suggested biological rather than mechanical systems. "This is incredible," he reported back to the starbound horizon, his voice carrying clearly through the ship's communication systems. "The architecture appears to be some form of advanced biotechnology, possibly a symbiotic relationship between living organisms and manufactured components. The aesthetic is, well, it's beautiful, but also completely alien in ways that suggest a fundamentally different approach to engineering and design." Marcus found her in what appeared to be the ship's central chamber, suspended in a translucent pod that pulsed with the same bioluminescent rhythms as the corridor walls. She was undeniably humanoid but with features that spoke of evolutionary paths humanity had never taken, skin that seemed to glow with its own inner light, hair that shifted between silver and deep violet depending on the angle of illumination, and elegantly pointed ears that suggested aesthetic refinement rather than simple genetic variation. "Well, this complicates things," he muttered, checking his scanner readings while trying to determine whether she was in some form of stasis or simply sleeping. The life signs were definitely present but operating according to biological principles his equipment couldn't properly interpret. "Starbound horizon, I've found a survivor. Single individual, appears to be in some form of suspended animation. Proceeding with standard first contact protocols." As he approached the pod to get better scanner readings, her eyes opened with the fluid precision of someone who had been aware of his presence long before choosing to acknowledge it. They were violet, with depths that seemed to contain actual starlight, and they fixed on his face with an intensity that made him suddenly aware of how alone he was on an alien vessel with someone whose capabilities and intentions remained completely unknown. "Hello," he said, activating his suit's translation protocols while keeping his hands visible and his posture non-threatening. "I'm Captain Marcus Reed from the human research vessel Starbound Horizon. We received your distress signal and came to offer assistance." The pod's surface dissolved like morning mist, allowing her to step out with movements that flowed like liquid mercury given human form. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that suggested vocal cords designed for frequencies human ears weren't quite equipped to process, yet somehow he understood every word with crystalline clarity. "Human," she said, the word carrying curiosity rather than surprise. "It has been some time since I encountered your species. I am Nixer of the Sanguinari, and I must express gratitude for your response to my beacon, though I fear the assistance you offer may not be of the nature you expect." "Sanguinari," Marcus repeated, running the term through his suit's database and finding no matches in known xenological records. "I'm not familiar with your species. Are you injured? Do you require medical attention or emergency transport?" Nixera moved through her ship with unconscious grace, her bare feet making no sound against the organic flooring as she led him toward what appeared to be a combination living area and command center. The chamber was furnished with what looked like crystallized starlight shaped into functional furniture, and the walls displayed images that might have been star charts or abstract art depending on interpretation. "Medical attention," she mused, settling onto what Marcus assumed was a chair despite its resemblance to a sculpture of frozen music. An interesting phrase. "Tell me, Captain Reed, what do you understand about the nature of symbiotic relationships between different species?" "Basic xenobiology," Marcus replied, remaining standing since he wasn't entirely sure how her furniture would react to his environmental suit. "Mutually beneficial partnerships, usually involving resource exchange or protection. Common throughout known space, though the specific mechanisms vary considerably between species." "Indeed," Nixera said, her violet eyes studying him with the focused attention of someone evaluating a particularly interesting specimen. "My people, the Sanguinari, evolved as energy feeders rather than consumers of conventional matter. We sustain ourselves by drawing life force from compatible organisms, though the process is considerably more complex than simple predation." Marcus felt his hand drift unconsciously toward his sidearm, though something in her manner suggested that aggression would be both futile and unnecessary. When you say life force. Not what you might initially assume, she interrupted with what might have been amusement. We do not drain the life from our partners, Captain Reed. Rather, we form symbiotic bonds that enhance the vitality of both participants. The relationship is intimate, profound, and permanent in ways that your language lacks adequate terms to describe. She rose from her chair and moved closer, her presence carrying a magnetism that seemed to bypass his rational mind and speak directly to instincts he didn't fully understand. My species has been diminishing for centuries, Captain Reed. We are long-lived but few in number, and the bonds we require for survival have become increasingly rare as the galaxy changes around us. So you're looking for compatible partners, Marcus said, his scientific training helping him maintain focus despite the growing awareness that this conversation was moving in directions his first contact protocols hadn't anticipated. Is that why you were broadcasting the distress signal? Perceptive, Nixera replied, and Marcus detected approval in her voice. The signal was calibrated to attract individuals with specific genetic markers that suggest compatibility with our bonding processes. Your presence here, alone and responsive to my call, indicates that you possess the rare characteristics necessary for the kind of partnership my people require. Partnership, Marcus repeated, acutely aware that the word carried implications he wasn't sure he was prepared to explore. What exactly would that involve? Nixera's smile revealed teeth that were slightly too sharp for human comfort, though her expression held warmth rather than menace. Immortality, Captain Reed. Enhanced physical capabilities, shared consciousness, and a connection that transcends the isolation that has defined both our existences. In exchange, I would have a partner whose life energy resonates with mine, creating a bond that sustains us both across the centuries. Marcus felt his heart rate increase as the full implications of her offer settled into his consciousness like pieces of a puzzle he hadn't realized he was solving. You're talking about permanently altering my biology, aren't you? Changing what I am on a fundamental level. I am offering you the opportunity to become more than what you are, she replied, approaching close enough that he could see the patterns of light that played beneath her luminescent skin. But only if that is what you truly desire. The bonding cannot be forced, Captain Reed. It requires willing participation from both individuals, or it fails catastrophically for all involved. The hours that followed blurred together as Marcus found himself drawn deeper into conversation with Nixera, their dialogue ranging from technical discussions about interstellar travel to philosophical explorations of consciousness and identity that challenged every assumption he'd made about the nature of existence. She moved through her ship with the unconscious authority of someone who had spent centuries mastering technologies beyond human comprehension, yet her manner remained approachable despite the otherworldly charisma that seemed to emanate from her very presence. You mentioned that your people are diminishing, Marcus said, examining a control panel that appeared to respond to thought rather than physical manipulation. Is it a matter of low birth rates, or something more fundamental? Both and neither, Nixera replied, her fingers dancing across surfaces that glowed in response to her touch. The sanguinari reproduce rarely, but our primary challenge is the increasing scarcity of compatible bonding partners. As younger species develop space travel, they often prove unsuitable for the kind of deep psychic connection our survival requires. And humans are compatible. Some humans, she corrected, turning to study him with an intensity that made him feel like a puzzle she was trying to solve. Perhaps 1 in 10 million possesses the genetic markers that allow for successful bonding. Your presence here, your response to my beacon, the way your life energy resonates with the ship's bioneural networks, all indicate that you are among that rare few. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with his environmental suit's temperature controls. So I was specifically selected, not just responding to a random distress call. Selection implies conscious choice on your part, Nixera said, her voice carrying notes of something that might have been regret. The beacon merely identifies potential compatibility. Your decision to investigate, to board my vessel alone, to continue this conversation despite obvious risks, those choices were entirely your own. She gestured toward a section of wall that became transparent at her approach, revealing a view of space that somehow seemed more vivid and alive than anything Marcus had ever seen through conventional viewports. Stars pulsed with their own rhythms, and nebulae swirled in patterns that suggested consciousness rather than mere cosmic phenomena. "I have been alone for 237 years, Captain Reed," she said, her reflection overlapping with the starfield beyond. "I have watched civilizations rise and fall, witnessed the birth of new worlds and the death of ancient suns, all while searching for someone whose mind could touch mine without being consumed by the experience." "That sounds incredibly lonely," Marcus said, moving to stand beside her despite every regulation that warned against getting emotionally involved with alien contacts. "Loneliness is an inadequate term for the isolation experienced by beings designed for symbiotic connection," Nixra replied, her violet eyes reflecting the starlight beyond the transparent wall. "Imagine spending centuries with the knowledge that everything you are, your thoughts, your experiences, your understanding of the universe, is meant to be shared with another consciousness, yet never finding someone capable of that level of intimacy." Marcus found himself studying her profile, noting the way starlight seemed to gather around her features as if drawn by some fundamental property of her biology. What would the bonding actually involve? I mean, beyond the obvious implications of immortality and shared consciousness. "Complete psychic integration," she said, turning to face him with an expression that mixed hope with careful restraint. "During the bonding process, our minds merge temporarily, allowing each of us to experience the other's memories, emotions, and perspectives. The connection that forms becomes permanent, enabling us to share thoughts and feelings across any distance." "That's terrifying and fascinating in equal measure," Marcus admitted, his scientific mind warring with instincts that warned against permanent alterations to his fundamental nature. "What about my connection to humanity? My responsibilities aboard the star-bound horizon?" "The bonding enhances rather than replaces your existing identity," Nixra explained, her tone suggesting she had considered these concerns extensively. "You would remain human in all essential aspects, but with expanded capabilities and perspective that comes from shared experience with someone who has witnessed the universe across centuries of exploration." Marcus walked away from the viewport, needing space to process the implications of what she was describing. "And if I refuse? If I thank you for the explanation and return to my ship?" "Then you return to your ship, and I continue my search," she replied without hesitation. "The bonding must be freely chosen, Captain Reed. Coercion produces connections that are unstable and ultimately destructive for both participants. I have waited over 2 centuries to find someone compatible, I can wait longer if necessary." "But you don't want to wait longer," Marcus observed, reading the carefully controlled hope in her expression. "No," she admitted, her voice carrying vulnerability that seemed at odds with her otherworldly composure. "I have grown weary of isolation, of experiencing the wonders of the universe alone, of having no one with whom to share the accumulated knowledge and perspective that comes from centuries of existence. You are the first being I have encountered who possesses both the genetic compatibility and the emotional maturity necessary for successful bonding." Marcus found himself drawn back to the viewport, staring out at stars that seemed to pulse with rhythms that matched his heartbeat. "How does the process work? The actual bonding, I mean." "Through direct contact that allows our bioneural systems to synchronize," Nixra said, approaching until she stood close enough that he could feel the subtle electromagnetic field that surrounded her. "What your mythology might call a bite, though the reality is considerably more complex and intimate than simple physical contact." "A bite," Marcus repeated, the word carrying implications that made his pulse quicken with a mixture of fear and anticipation he couldn't quite understand. "The formation of a permanent psychic and biological bond through the sharing of life essence," she corrected gently. "It is the most intimate act possible between 2 conscious beings, the literal merging of souls, if you accept that such things exist." The decision crystallized in Marcus's mind with the sudden clarity that comes from recognizing a fundamental truth that had been hiding just beneath the surface of conscious awareness. Standing in the starlight streaming through Nixra's viewport, surrounded by the gentle bioluminescence of a ship that seemed more alive than any vessel he'd ever encountered, he realized that his entire life had been a series of preparations for this moment. I want to understand what you're offering, he said, turning away from the stars to face her directly. Not just the technical aspects or the biological implications, but what it would actually mean for both of us. Nixera's expression shifted, hope and caution warring in her violet eyes as she recognized the change in his tone from academic curiosity to genuine consideration. It would mean an end to isolation for both of us, Captain Reed. Shared experience, mutual understanding, and the kind of connection that transcends individual consciousness while preserving what makes each of us unique. And the practical implications? My duties, my career, my life aboard human vessels. Enhanced rather than abandoned, she replied, moving closer with the fluid grace that marked all her movements. The bonding grants capabilities that would make you more valuable to your species, not less. Enhanced strength, improved cognitive function, extended lifespan, and perspective that comes from access to centuries of accumulated knowledge. Marcus felt his environmental suit's life support systems humming around him, a reminder that he was currently dependent on artificial systems to survive in this alien environment, while she moved through her ship's atmosphere with natural ease. What about compatibility? Cultural differences, different approaches to existence. Those differences are what make the bonding valuable, Nixera said, extending her hand in a gesture that seemed both invitation and question. I have spent centuries observing the universe from one perspective, while you bring understanding shaped by human experience and culture. Together, we would see reality through complementary viewpoints that neither could achieve alone. Marcus stared at her extended hand, knowing that accepting it would represent a commitment that would alter the fundamental nature of his existence. I've spent 15 years in space, telling myself I was exploring the unknown and expanding human understanding of the galaxy. But if I'm honest, I was also running from the kind of deep connection that requires vulnerability and trust. And now, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Now I'm being offered the deepest possible connection with someone who understands isolation the way I do, Marcus said, reaching up to deactivate his helmet's seals. Someone who's been searching for partnership rather than conquest, understanding rather than dominance. The helmet retracted with a soft hiss, and Marcus breathed in the ship's atmosphere for the first time, air that carried subtle harmonics and electromagnetic resonances that seemed to synchronize with his heartbeat. Nixera's presence became even more compelling without the barrier of his protective equipment, her natural charisma enhanced by pheromones and energy fields that spoke directly to parts of his consciousness he hadn't known existed. Are you certain? She asked, her hand still extended between them. Once begun, the bonding process cannot be reversed. We would be connected across time and space, sharing thoughts and emotions in ways that human relationships rarely achieve. I'm certain, Marcus said, taking her hand and feeling immediate warmth that seemed to flow directly into his nervous system. I've been alone in crowds, isolated despite being surrounded by colleagues and friends. If I'm going to be changed forever, I'd rather it be by connection than continued solitude. Nixera's smile was radiant, transforming her otherworldly beauty into something that seemed to make the ship's bioluminescent panels pulse in harmony with her emotions. Then come, she said, leading him toward what appeared to be a private chamber where starlight filtered through transparent walls and patterns that suggested intimate rather than public space. The actual bonding was nothing like the violent feeding that human mythology associated with vampiric encounters. Nixera's touch was gentle as she guided him to recline against surfaces that adapted to support his body, her movements deliberate and reverent as she prepared for what was clearly a sacred act rather than simple sustenance. This will be intense, she warned, positioning herself so that her face was close to his neck, her breath carrying warmth that seemed to penetrate directly into his bloodstream. You will experience my memories, my emotions, my understanding of the universe, while I share in yours. The process can be overwhelming for those unprepared for such intimacy. I trust you, Marcus said, and realized he meant it completely despite having known her for mere hours. When her fangs pierced his skin, the sensation was nothing like pain. Instead, it was like coming home after a lifetime of wandering, like finding the missing piece of himself that he hadn't realized was absent. His consciousness expanded to encompass her memories of centuries among the stars, her accumulated knowledge of alien civilizations and cosmic phenomena, her deep loneliness and desperate hope for connection. In return, she experienced his human perspective. His wonder at space travel, his dedication to exploration and discovery, his own isolation disguised as professional competence, and his genuine desire to understand and help others despite the personal cost. "Now you're mine forever," she whispered against his neck as the bonding completed, the words carrying no sense of possession but rather mutual recognition of permanent partnership. "And you're mine," Marcus replied, feeling her consciousness settling into his mind like a missing piece of himself finally returned. The bond between them pulsed with shared emotion, not the desperate hunger he had expected, but profound gratitude and the kind of love that develops when two beings recognize their perfect complement in each other. The universe suddenly seemed larger and more wonderful than he had ever imagined, filled with possibilities for exploration and discovery that neither of them could achieve alone. Their connection transcended individual existence while preserving what made each of them unique, creating something new and extraordinary from the merger of human curiosity and sanguinary wisdom. In that moment, Marcus understood that what he had feared as losing his humanity had actually allowed him to discover a more complete version of himself, while Nyxra's eternal search had finally ended not with conquest but with genuine partnership among the stars.